Okay, thank you, Bob. Thank you all for those that will join. Most people, unfortunately, will watch the replay rather than the live event. I'm thrilled to have one of my superheroes, Bob Willard, who is I I see him as a kind of Swiss Army knife of everything related to sustainability and getting things done in a practical manner. So, Bob, for those that are not familiar with you and the work that you've done over many, many years, just briefly kind of tell us a bit about your journey and how you kind of got into the sustainability and what is net zero procurement.
Sure. There are about three questions in there, and I'm not sure we got time to answer all of them. The My background is I spent 34 years in IBM Canada, and actually I had nothing to do with sustainability in my day job at IBM. But in the latter years there, the community in which I was living got into some concerns about the quality of the water that we were drinking, and that awoke me to the need for a little more attention to those kinds of things. And I was doing a part-time master's at the University of Toronto, and I finished it with some courses in environmental studies. And that woke me up to some of the problems that we'd had. I'd always assumed that the people who were looking after us were looking after us, and turned out they weren't quite as active as I thought they might be. So um, I I wrote a paper on the business case for companies doing more to reduce their impacts, their negative impacts on society and on the environment than they were already doing. So the business case for sustainability was basically my master's. I retired in 2000. I converted that master's into a book, The Sustainability Advantage. And then I wrote four or five, actually five more books after that. Did a doctorate at the U of T, and have really drilled down into how to cost justify doing more than an organization already is doing on this. And then making some tools available. They're free, they're open source tools. All of my stuff is free and open source, just about, except for the books and some slides. Um, but I'm really trying to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel and waste time recreating things which are already available. So I've got tools that help organizations assess how they're doing on sustainability and use those for reporting if they want to, especially small companies. And tools that help them do more than they're already doing and cost justifying that, and tools that get into procurement, sustainable procurement, net zero procurement, and help them integrate those approaches into their existing processes. So that's what I do. And I do a lot of talks. I do 50 to 80 talks a year.
Wow.
Three last week, three this week, and two next week, I guess. And they're all over the world, and it's wonderful using this technology to be able to do that without traveling. So mostly what I do is I do talks and try to provide tools to others who are working within their organizations or with organizations
Mhm.
to help them improve their sustainability performance.
Before we dive deep into net zero procurement, there's been a lot of pushback and criticism and greenwashing and green hushing about present sustainability claims or performance. Bloomberg claimed there's $50 trillion going into ESG. And I was thinking, wow, if that was really going into ESG, we probably wouldn't have much of a problem, with society, the environment, climate change. So, how do you maintain your focus and not getting really pissed off at all of these nonsensical claims? Or are they not nonsensical?
Well, a lot of my energy comes from channeling my anger in, in more productive ways. But yeah, there's a lot to get upset about, no question about it. And the pushback from businesses is that there is a very inbred um, opinion that if you do more on this, it's going to cost you a lot of money.
Right.
and it's going to interfere with your current business model in a way that interferes with your success and your ability to make profit. And a lot of the early efforts that I referred to before on the business case for sustainability was trying to counter that mindset with facts that show that companies are doing very, very well by doing the things that they do in a more responsible way. So um, a lot of the mentality of this has been fostered by business schools. So I
Mm.
do talks in business schools as well to try to wake them up to the opportunity that some of the sustainability challenges give them to actually do better and change their business model so that they're not only helping shareholders become more wealthy, but they're also helping stakeholders improve their well-being. And the stakeholders include the environment and society at large.
Mm. When we started TBLI about 28 years ago, we were always, I would always get the request, oh, Robert, this sustainability stuff, because we focused on the financial sector, is quite interesting. Do you have any proof that shows there's no underperformance at worst or an outperformance at best? And I foolishly used to send all the reports because there was loads of reports. And then I finally had the aha moment and realized that this was not about proof. This was about belief. So how do we get people? It's almost the same thing with MAGA and Trump. It's not about facts. It's not about proof. It's about belief. How do you get companies to believe that what you're saying is in their interest?
Well, referring to any of their peers or their competitors, especially that seem to be doing better while they're
Mhm.
doing more valuable, helpful things for people and planet, sometimes helps. Um, but being asked by important stakeholders to pay more attention to this will change the mindset faster than anything else. And the three important stakeholders in a capitalistic system are ones that provide capital or provide revenue. So
Mhm.
if an investor
Right.
or a banker or a customer thinks this stuff is important enough to do more on it, then it's important enough to do more on it. So when bankers and investors get a little twitchy, for example, about the potential impact on the financial statements of one of their clients because of climate change and the impact that climate change might have on the organization in which they have invested money or loaned money to it, which could prevent the organization from paying back the loan or giving a good return on the investment, then they want to know a little bit more about what the company is doing to get ready for climate change and to avoid contributing to climate change. And when you get important folks like that asking those questions, all of a sudden, this is not a tree hugger issue.
Mm.
This is a hard-nosed business issue. So the NGOs, bless their hearts, they have been trying for years to get the attention of business. But when you have hard-nosed investors and bankers asking the same questions that the non-governmental organizations, especially environmental ones, were asking, all of a sudden the answers become more important. And now the effort to avoid greenwashing, as you were referring to before, and kind of
Oh,
stretching the truth on that.
I think you turned off your camera.
Yeah, I
I
don't know
hear
if I,
you. At the lower left or lower right-hand corner, you should see a little symbol with video on it. If you press on
I'm
that.
getting, okay, I'm getting a message that you turned it off. So,
Oh, no, no, I didn't. Okay, my apology. Let me see what I did.
okay, no problem.
Okay. Uh,
It
one
says I
second.
can't start my video because you turned it off.
There we go. Sorry about that.
All right, let me try again.
There we go. We're back.
Bingo. All right.
My
So
apologies.
I was referring to the effect on the mindset of business people of important stakeholders like investors and bankers asking them about how they're doing on sustainability related things, having a much bigger impact than the usual suspects that are asking companies to clean up their act.
Mm,
And included in that trio are not only investors and bankers, but customers. And
Mm.
that leads us to the procurement approach as a market force to create more pressure on suppliers to do more on issues that are important to their customers.
So if you can just simply, I'm sure you can, simply explain what is net zero procurement.
Sure. So let me give you a four-part definition of it. So basically, it's making sure that you get best value for money, still important, best value for money by procuring the most low carbon goods and services. So that's the carbon part
Mhm.
from the suppliers who are most committed to reducing their greenhouse gases in line with science-based targets. And you're doing that because the customer has strategic goals or strategies that are related to their own efforts to reduce their greenhouse gases as well. So it's important to the customer, and therefore it's important to their suppliers. If the customer doesn't care about this stuff, their credibility as an agent for encouraging their suppliers to do more is a little bit suspect. They got to walk the talk on this. But there is so much pressure on organizations by governments and other forces as well to reduce their greenhouse gases these days. Um, Not only their own, but the greenhouse gases that are coming from other parts of their value chain. And the
Mm.
value chain upstream is called the supply chain, and downstream is called the customer chain. So they used to be able to say, no, 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 that's not our problem. We don't own those companies. Ask them how they're doing. And they're not able to get away with that anymore. They can't outsource the dirty stuff and expect to get, medals for doing well and doing good. They are now mutually accountable for what's happening in their supply chain. And in the case of greenhouse gases, um, there are 13 different sources, 15 different sources of greenhouse gases that are indirect upstream and downstream that companies are now mutually accountable for. And it's driving them nuts to try to figure out how to quantify those things and do something about them. So the interest of large corporations, especially in all of this, and governments, large buyers, um, is a lot higher in the last 5 to 10 years than it used to be.
But how do you quantify or verify that buying, I don't know, this computer or this lighting system or, this landscaping person is lower carbon than someone else? Who is verifying that?
That's a great question because the calculation of that carbon footprint or embedded or embodied carbon, which is associated with whatever you buy. So if I buy a stapler, what's the
Right.
carbon footprint of a stapler? It's
Yeah,
got metal,
exactly.
it's got plastic. So the calculation of that is a little tricky. There are four different ways to do the calculation. The greenhouse gas protocol, the GHG protocol,
Okay.
is the master template for how to do all of those calculations. And they suggest there are four ways to calculate the carbon footprint of a product. Some of them are very, very general estimates. But what they're trying to do is to determine how many greenhouse gases or how much greenhouse gas emissions um, were generated by the extraction of the metal associated with that object initially, the refining of that metal or ore or those materials, which is another stage in the supply chain, and then converting those into parts that are going to be then put together and assembled and packaged and then sold. So you go through multiple tiers, multiple suppliers to suppliers to suppliers in the supply chain. And what we're suggesting is that a product has embodied in it the carbon dioxide equivalents, the greenhouse gases that are associated with the production of the materials in that object and the packaging and transportation of that object. That's the carbon footprint. And figuring that out is right now it's a black art. It's really, really challenging, but we're getting better at it. And of course, the challenge is to get the data from deep into your supply chain. Just getting it from your immediate suppliers is a big enough challenge. Getting it from your suppliers, called your tier two suppliers, is
Right.
even more challenging. And then your tier three suppliers, and then your tier four suppliers. So it's really challenging to be able to make sure that you are doing the calculations in a informed way, and the raw data required by those calculations is the ongoing challenge.
And is there a website, organization, nonprofit that is collating all of this data, or is this just done by thousands of different consultants selling information about this?
There are lots and lots of calculators out there with various levels of sophistication in them. The EPA in the US has got
Oh,
good calculators. CDP,
really?
which used to be called the Carbon Disclosure Project, but now because they're looking not only carbon, but water and
Right.
forests and plastics and so on, it's now just called CDP. So all of the big organizations that are into this have got calculators. Lots of consulting companies have calculators. Um, so yeah, it's not as hard as it used to be, but it's still challenging. I was part of an effort by the government of Canada, it's a task force that they put together to try to come up with how to estimate the carbon footprints associated with three different categories of products. One was electric vehicles, cars, vans, and trucks that the government buys for various purposes. So how do you figure out the carbon footprint of those things? How do you figure out the carbon footprint of desks, chairs, and shelving,
Right.
office furniture? And then the third one was a little bit strange, but anyway, they were undertaking it because they use so many consultants. Um, how do you figure out the carbon footprint of professional services?
Mm.
Consultants. What the heck does that mean? Uh, so, uh, so we went through an exercise of coming up with calculators that helped with the totaling up of the carbon footprints associated with those categories. And it was an interesting exercise because, as usual, the raw data required to plug into their formulas is the challenge. We know what the formulas are. It's just hard to get the data. So they use other estimation approaches, databases that have general amounts of carbon associated with various activities. And those databases are getting better and better as well. So yeah, we're getting better at it, but it's still a bit of a challenge.
Before I go into the other point that you wanted to cover about how NCP can be the missing market for it, there's a question from Rona who was asking, what do you think of non-nature-based carbon credits for the future, driving innovation and new methodologies? Many around the ability to measure more accurately permanence and scalability.
Yeah, carbon credits are a pretty interesting topic, and it implies that you can buy your way out of whatever
Mm,
emissions you are currently giving by offsetting them. So rather than reducing your own greenhouse gases, you help others reduce their greenhouse gases by providing them with technology that doesn't require them to um, burn fossil fuels for light or electricity and so on. Um, so there's a concern that those are overused, and the Science-Based Targets Institute (SBTI), which is sort of the Bible for how to reduce your greenhouse gases and keep track of it in a useful way. Um, they say you shouldn't get into carbon credits until the last 10% of the greenhouse gases that you're supposed to be reducing. the first effort should be just reduce your greenhouse gases.
Mm.
Then if you get to the point where you just cannot get rid of maybe the last 10%, then you can look at offsets and make darn sure that they are gold standard offsets or whatever label you want to associate with them, because there are some that are a little more suspect than others. But the tricky thing is sometimes you can buy protection of trees. Trees absorb greenhouse gases, thank
Sure.
goodness. But unfortunately, if you invest in the protection of trees or planting of trees that are going to absorb your carbon dioxide or already have, um, these days with forest fires and bushfires and so on, the question is how's the stewardship of those plants going to be managed in the future to ensure that they continue to reduce the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by their presence. So the nature-based approaches to carbon credits, um, you have to take a good hard look at where are these trees and who's looking after them and what kind of trees are they and so on, to make sure that you're doing due diligence on the attributes of the credits that you are purchasing.
Okay. Getting to point two about procuring a fix to the climate crisis, how NCP or net zero procurement can be the missing market force engaging companies in the race to net zero greenhouse gas emissions, because you're basically not shouting loudly in Mandarin to someone who speaks German, talking about the corporates. You're talking in the language they understand, and more about resilience rather than sacrifice.
Yeah, and it needs to be something that can be added to the existing processes that are already being used by the procurement people. We need to
Mhm.
meet them where they are, celebrate the approaches that they're already using, and simply add additional things to those. And basically, we're adding four things. The first one is that they are already asking about the attributes, the performance, the quality of the products that they're buying. They don't want to buy cheap garbage products. So
No.
the user department that asks procurement, would you please get me this kind of product, wants to make darn sure it's a good product. If it's a computer, that it is fast and it's robust and it's running the right kind of software. So all the usual attributes. All we're saying is add a couple of other ones to that,
Mhm.
like recycled material content of the product, or if you can do it, the carbon footprint of the product and the attributes of the packaging. And does the supplier take it back at the end of its useful life, either to be sold to somebody else or as a trade-in on a new product? So
Mhm.
get into circularity a little bit as well. So you can ask about the product, building on the other quality attributes. These are really additional quality attributes of the product. It's not an unnatural act. It's something you're doing anyway. So just add a few more attributes. Like what? There's lots of guidance on that from databases, especially in Europe. The Netherlands government has a wonderful set of guidance on, depending on the product category that you're acquiring, the kinds of attributes you should be asking about from a sustainability point of view. The UK does, the US does, the EPA does as well. So there's lots of good guidance on what those things are. It's not hard. It's not hard. Just ask them. So you make sure that you're getting the lowest carbon product. The second thing is you need to ask the supplier as an organization, as an enterprise, how it's doing on things that matter. So in the case of carbon, greenhouse gases, climate change, what are they doing to reduce their greenhouse gases? Why do you care as a supplier? Because, as I said before, you are mutually accountable for the emissions that are coming from your supply chain. And if you take a look at a normal company, 50 to 90% of the greenhouse gases associated with that company's operation are coming from its supply chain.
Mhm.
So they need to get their heads around how much is that and work with their suppliers on reducing it. So you ask the suppliers, where are you on this? Do you have a baseline year against which you are reducing your greenhouse gas emissions? Are you committed to science-based targets? How's it going? What are you going to do in the next 2 years? Because this is kind of an urgent issue. This is not something you can put off forever. Um, so how's it going? So you ask them questions. What questions? Um, there are wonderful uh, questionnaires from EcoVadis, from Supply Shift, from
Mm.
Persephone, from Cordy. I've got some as well that are in Excel format that you can pick and choose. If you're already asking your suppliers questions about these kinds of things, um, you can layer these questions on top of it. So of course you always want to know some information about your suppliers, how long they've been in business and all that kind of stuff. This is just another part of their profile as to where they are on their greenhouse gas reductions. So that's the second thing. The first one was product attributes. Second one was ask them about their operation as an organization. The third thing is you make their scores on the product and what they are doing as a company matter. In other words, in the bid appraisal, and every company has a bid appraisal template where they assign weight to different factors that are being asked for. Um, and you assign enough weight to these things that they matter. In other words, this is not something that's worth a couple of points. It's worth at least enough points, maybe 10 to 30 of the 30% of the available points to matter. Now, why do I say that? Because if you don't, they're just going to blow off the questionnaire.
Mm.
They won't care. But if they realize that this is an important dimension to the decision that is being made as to who the customer is going to buy from, they're going to pay attention to it. I mentioned before I used to be in IBM, and for many years I was in marketing in IBM, and I was on the supplier side of this equation. I was responding to RFPs that I would get from large companies and
Mm.
large governments. And the first thing we looked at when we got an RFP is how many points are associated with this
Oh.
specification. And of course, we would spend the most effort to make darn sure we would get the best score on the ones that had the most points. So assign enough points to these scores to get the attention of the supplier to make them want to do better, to motivate them to do better. Why? Because if they do better, they'll have a better chance of winning the bid. This is a pretty straightforward
Yeah.
dynamic, and it's one that everybody's used to. So what we're saying is score the product, score the supplier, make it matter in the bid appraisal template. And then the fourth part of what I'm suggesting is you add terms and conditions to the winning supplier, the contract, um, that makes darn sure they follow through on whatever they said they were going to do in the questionnaire. So you make it matter. You put some teeth in there and say, by the way, if you don't do this, we're going to cancel the order. You lose the bid. Or if we have the answers to the questionnaire verified by a third party, if you haven't already done that, and we do that, and we find that your score is more than 10% out of whack with your original score, you lose the bid. So
Mm.
don't screw around with it. And we we stopped dancing with this stuff. This is really important. We are in a crisis here, and we need all hands on deck. So it's important that we use the buying power of large organizations to engage their suppliers and give them extra points if they use a similar approach with their suppliers
Mm.
and their suppliers and their suppliers. So we get a ripple effect going here as we work through that supply chain that is so hard to be able to access from the original customer's point of view, but the suppliers know who their suppliers are, and so on and so on and so on. And if we can encourage them to use a similar approach with their suppliers, we start to get the kind of ripple effect that really builds up a tsunami of interest in this stuff.
This seems very focused on business to business or government to business. Is there anyone working with this idea for business to consumer to try to educate the consumer about buying products that fulfill these net zero procurement qualifications.
Yeah, there are, and usually consumers are looking for labels, eco
Yeah.
labels that reassure them that the products that they are purchasing are responsible products or fair trade, that kind of stuff. Um, there's been a lot of license taken on some of those labels, and some companies create their own labels, but we're getting better at that. And there are labels that consumers are like Energy Star labels and so on,
Mm.
that consumers are encouraged to look for to reassure them that they are getting the product which is performing the best on something that they care about.
So this concept of the net zero procurement is because trying to, what some are doing in the investment world or others do, to decarbonize industry takes a really long time. And I know people hate hearing this, but unfortunately, fossil fuels will probably be around for far too long because of the challenges in decarbonizing. So you're taking a completely different track. You're not trying to get them to, decarbonize. You're just using the power of purchasing to force them in a different direction.
Yeah, and I'd like the term motivate more than force. There are a lot of good opportunities for them to get government grants or support from other organizations as they convert from fossil fuels to renewable energy, as they go from furnaces to heat pumps. Um, and the frustrating thing is that there are more funds available than are being taken advantage of. And the
Ah,
reason they're not is because we don't have motivated companies to do that. And especially, a lot of the attention is on the big guys. And that's understandable because the big guys are normally the biggest emitters. So large companies are being targeted initially. And in Canada, for example, the federal government of Canada has a standard that requires any organization which is doing more than $25 million worth of business with the federal government of Canada a year is required to join what we call the Net Zero Challenge, which is a commitment by the company to reduce its greenhouse gases in line with science-based targets. So get to zero by 2050 and halfway there by 2030. So they have to sign that letter of commitment. And then there are a couple of questionnaires and the annual reports that make sure they're on track to do that. There are other efforts. CDP has got good efforts. Science-Based Targets Initiative has got good efforts as well. So if they don't want to join the Net Zero Challenge or equivalent, they can use one of those. So they're going after the big guys. What I'm saying is, well, that's terrific. But what about the rest of the companies, not the big guys? And in Canada, and this is true for just about every jurisdiction, most of the companies are small and medium-sized enterprises.
mm,
In Canada, 99.8% of the companies in Canada have 500 employees or less. That's the definition of a small or medium-sized enterprise.
wow.
99.8. 0.2% of the companies have more than 500 employees. If you drop it down to 100 employees or less, it's 98%. In Canada, in the US, it's 98%. In Europe, it's a little higher. In Africa, it's higher still. Around the world, 98% roughly of the companies are small, and they're just trying to survive. I mean, they're not that motivated to get into reducing their greenhouse gases. They've got other priorities, understandably. So what the heck do we do about them? And are they big enough to worry about? Well, it turns out that a study that was done in Canada by a bank, actually, BDC, Business Development Corporation, which is a crown corporation, which is a bank, asked small and medium-sized enterprises how it's going. First of all, they determined that 41% of the greenhouse gases in Canada are coming from SMEs, small and medium-sized
Wow.
enterprises.
Yeah, yeah.
41%. And then they
Wow.
went to them, or a good sample of them, and they said, so how's it going on your plans to reduce your greenhouse gases? And 50% of them said, yeah, we do have some plans and we're working on it. 18% said, we're thinking about it. And a third of them said, we have no plans and we have no plans to have plans. And that ain't going to work. That ain't going to work. We need them on board. So we need to be able to engage them in a way that works for them and works for the climate in a way that the questionnaire that we send to them is reasonable for an SME to be able to complete. And I spent a few years creating that kind of a questionnaire. It's free, it's open source, it's in an Excel format, but the questions can be layered into an online tool if they already are using one. So it's not rocket science. It's really simple. The challenge is to help them understand that this is important enough to their customer that it's important to them. And that's the dynamic that procurement taps into. That's why I'm calling it a market force. And in a capitalistic system, market forces matter. And if your customer thinks that this is something you should be working on, you should be working on it. Even if you don't, in your heart of hearts, think it's something that is worthy of your attention. Customers drive behaviors in their suppliers. As a IBMer, I sure as heck understood that.
And the new EU regulation around reporting, I think it's 500 employees, the CSRD. Um, um, do they have also elements of net zero procurement or reporting that could kind of stimulate those? Because, it's not all super multinationals, it's also impacting smaller companies.
Yeah, they're going to phase that in, understandably, over time. They're starting with the big guys, and that's normal for most
Mhm.
jurisdictions. Um, but they do have dates by which they will extend the requirement to report on the corporate sustainable development uh, activities in their enterprise. So the CSRD, Corporate Sustainable Development Reporting Act in Europe, is going to have a bigger and bigger net to catch companies that are headquartered in the EU. And the neat thing about it is, it also is a requirement for companies that are doing enough business with the EU to also be included in that. So some of the big North American companies are now
Mm.
expected to produce that kind of report because their customers are in Europe. And if you're doing business in Europe, you need to pay attention to that. So does the CSRD ask about greenhouse gases and supply chain greenhouse gases? Yes. It also asks about other sustainability things, such as waste and water, and how you treat your employees, and how you are interacting with your community, and how ready you are for climate change, and a whole bunch of other materiality and double materiality kinds of things. So it's a big, big questionnaire, really amazing. It's a very comprehensive questionnaire. And I've got tools that are equally comprehensive that are appropriate for small and medium-sized enterprises. And initially, I was starting with sustainable procurement. Ask suppliers not only about how they're doing on reducing their greenhouse gases, but on reducing their waste, how they're treating water or how much water they use and so on, how they're treating their employees, impacts on the community. So 18 different things that are being asked by typical questionnaires that are related to sustainability. Um, and I started to realize it was just too much. It's overwhelming to be asked about all of those things all at
Sure.
once. So I thought, okay, of all of the issues around sustainability, the issue is climate change. We don't have a lot of runway left before we're going to be in a very bad situation. So we need to engage all companies on at least working on their greenhouse gas reductions. And then we can layer in other questions about modern slavery and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those kinds of social related things. Um, and plastics and waste and all of those things as well. We can layer those questions into the questionnaire. But let's start by just zeroing in on greenhouse gases and establish the approach that allows us to build on that foundation and go further. So it's a staged approach. This is stage one. Start with greenhouse gases and build it up.
But you firmly believe that taking the NCP approach offers speed and scale and can be addressed clearly to the climate crisis faster and more effectively than other strategies.
It's dead simple. It's dead simple. As I said before, the four things that are required for a net zero procurement system simply build on the foundation that's already being used by the procurement people. It is not hard. You're already asking about product attributes, ask about a few more. You're already asking about the supplier attributes, ask about a few more. You're already got terms and conditions in your contracts, add a few more. You're already using a bid appraisal template, just add a couple of more lines. So it isn't tricky. The hard thing is the decision. The decision is the hard part. Then we get on with it. And there's when you approach procurement people with this, they say, well, geez, we're understaffed and we've got these other huge things. We're being asked to do this, this, and this, and this. We just don't have time. We know it's important, but we just don't have time. And the impression is also that it's going to be more expensive to buy these kinds of products. So there's a built-in assumption that the lowest price mentality is going to be violated by this neat idea, but God, it's going to cost us a lot more. And what we need to be better at is focusing on best value versus best price. Best value says you are getting a better quality of product from a better quality of supplier. So these sustainability or greenhouse gas related attributes are quality attributes about the product and the supplier. So I think this thing could make a huge difference. So let's suppose in our wildest dreams, let's suppose the government of Canada got religion on this and they decided to introduce a net zero procurement approach to all of their buying. They buy about $30 billion worth of goods and services a year. So that's a significant market force. And they basically engage their suppliers in reducing their greenhouse gases. That's fantastic. But let's suppose they package it up in a way, the questionnaire and all of the things that they ask about, in a way that makes it really easy for the provinces in Canada and the municipalities in Canada to do the same kind of thing. And in fact, they encourage them to do that and help them do that. So let's suppose we do that for all of the public sector purchasing in Canada. That's $200 billion worth of buying power that we're unleashing on this issue, which is fantastic. That's the good news. The bad news is, in a way, that Canada is not that big a contributor to climate change. We only contribute less than 2% of the greenhouse gases in the world. So cleaning up our act isn't enough. We have to engage other jurisdictions. So my proposal is that Canada goes to the next COP, the Conference of the Parties, the thing that happens every November for the last 28 years, now 29 is coming up, where governments get together and bring their pledges, which they never meet, and they sign agreements at the end. And what I'm suggesting is that Canada goes and makes sure that the final agreement requires all countries to implement net zero procurement in their jurisdiction. So we'll blanket the world. That's $9 trillion worth of buying power that we're unleashing. And the neat thing about this approach, as I mentioned before, is the ripple effect that you can get through your supply chain, where you encourage suppliers to engage with their suppliers using the same approach, and you make it available to them. We can fix climate change if we use this market force. I really despair that I don't see it happening unless we do. I don't everything that we've tried to do up until now has been dismally ineffective. And
It,
meanwhile,
yeah,
and most businesses are sitting on the sidelines waiting for governments to fix climate change.
right. Yeah.
Why do they think that? Because governments get together every year and pledge that they're going to do that. And they haven't. They don't meet their pledges, and their pledges aren't sufficient. So we have to engage the business community. And the best way to engage the business community is to have those three actors we talked about before, bankers, investors, and customers, asking them, how's it going on this? Because it's important to us. It's important to you. How's it going? And score them on it and make sure that there's enough weight associated with those scores to make it matter.
I agree with you, which is why we've always focused mainly on the financial sector because the concentration of power and wealth is in very few hands and they control a lot. One of the big challenges that we've seen, you see it very clearly in the whole climate tech private equity venture space, which has gotten billions and billions of dollars, but none of them are going to impact climate in the short term. They're just chasing unicorns, like dry air capture. We put up a machine to suck CO2 out of the air, like taking a shot glass to the Pacific Ocean and scooping up water. Say we're going to move it, but they will create unicorns. There will be an IPO for that. They'll make lots of money. And that's one of the big challenges in getting the financial sector because there's 5 times more wealth than there is global GDP. 5 times. $5 chasing every dollar. And those who have lots of zeros, they want more zeros and they want unicorn chasing in the short term, which is why. So I agree with you that this is a no-brainer, but this is a no-brainer for people who have brains. How do you deal with the mindset of the financial sector, which are basically they're hunters, and you're talking about farming. You're trying to teach farming to hunters. Some of them are pirates, and they're incentivized for short-term behavior. That I've always found the challenge, although convincing them I haven't found too difficult. It hasn't been that hard. The access is the challenge. So how do you deal with those financial, because you probably speak to lots of people. You mentioned bankers and investors as important. How do you get them on board?
I don't
Seriously
know.
on board.
I don't know. If it was well known and we had the answer, we would have done it by now. But right now, the returns that they're getting from investing in continuation of fossil fuels,
Yeah,
unfortunately, are higher
yeah,
than what they can get from other investments. In Canada, the banks in Canada, especially the Royal Bank, um, are still heavily, heavily invested in the exploration as well as development of sources of oil and gas in Canada, whether it's
yeah.
fracking or the tar sands or whatever. Um, and the reason that they do that is because the oil and gas companies give incredible returns
Yeah.
on their investment. And then they hold out their hand to government. Would you please help us with carbon capture and storage because it's very expensive and we
Yeah.
don't have the money. You say, well, why don't you have the money? You just made a obscene amount of profit last year. And they said, oh, well, we gave all of that to our shareholders.
Right.
So
Buybacks.
it's amazing how good the oil and gas sector is on lobbying for things that require taxpayers, normal taxpayers, to clean up their act for them and to help them reduce their greenhouse gases. Plus, they run around claiming that carbon capture and storage is going to be the solution, the unicorn,
Mhm.
to their problem, to their emissions from their operations. And it turns out that their operations are only about 20% of the carbon footprint associated with their product. The other 80% is when we burn it
You're
for
right.
energy. And they don't talk about that. So they are really good. I mean, they are, man. They are almost as good as the nuclear sector on lobbying. So they show up at all of the COPs. They have more delegates than any other country. They're almost a country on their own. They are good, and they're powerful and they're influential. And it was only in the last couple of years that the word fossil fuels was in any of the COP agreements. They just wouldn't allow that language in there as being the source of the greenhouse gases. I mean, think of it, 28 years of COPs, and it's only in the last couple of years that there's an acknowledgement that the greenhouse gases that we're trying to reduce are coming from fossil fuels.
Mm.
It's incredible. So they're awfully good, they're awfully powerful, and they're very attractive investments for the financial community. And we somehow have to change that. And I don't know how.
How do you stay, because you've been doing this a while. So how do my biggest challenge, I always say, is not convincing others, is convincing my wife that we're on the right path. Because she can say, when are you finally going to break through over here? I keep
Yeah.
hearing this for years. How do you stay energized and focused to keep rolling the stone up the hill while people
Yeah.
put oil slicks on the hill and try to pull you back down?
Well, it's more fun than burying myself under a rock. uh, uh, I don't play golf. What else am I going to do with myself that's so much fun? I really think that this is a more hopeful
Yeah.
proposition than it has been ever before. I think the awareness of what's happening with climate change and connecting the dots between climate change and some of the god-awful events that are occurring both in Europe on the floods and so on, and in the US with hurricanes and tornadoes, and in Canada with the forest fires, and in California with the bushfires. Um, the, the, the awareness of the public that this is something which is starting to get personal for them, um, is helping to awaken everybody to the fact that this is not going to go away. It's only going to get worse unless we do something about it. So I think the readiness of
Mhm.
people and companies and governments to take action on this is a little higher because it's really, really expensive if
Yeah.
you don't. The disaster relief requirements in the US and Canada are huge,
Mm.
huge expenses for government. And it's not going to get better. And in fact, the health issues and all of those things are just going to magnify, amplify the issue. So sometimes things have to get really bad before they get better, and they're really bad. So I'm thinking that maybe they're bad enough that we'll start to take action that's long overdue. And if we act with speed and scale, we can do what needs to be done before it's too late.
What can the people that are listening to this live as small group and those that will watch the replay as we distribute it among our network, what can we do to help you?
Well, it's mostly what you can do to help yourselves. Get engaged, act, do something. So in my case, I live in Whitby, Ontario, just outside of Toronto.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, uh, I've joined the town's, the Whitby's Sustainable Advisory Committee, the SAC.
Mhm.
And I'm using that as a platform to engage with the procurement people in Whitby to see if I can get them engaged in net zero procurement and so on. So um, get into organizations through one door or another and see if you can help them see the benefit to them of doing more on some of these issues than they're already doing and feel good about it as well. Everybody wants to make a difference. And if you can make a difference through your organization on something that you care about, that's pretty satisfying. So um, there are so many different groups that are already working on these things. Join them. Don't start a new group. There's way too much fragmentation. Um, Find a group that resonates with your concerns and is doing something about it, and support them either with your presence and your influence or with whatever other support that they need from you. I think the time for sitting on the sidelines is long gone. We can't wait for others to do what is glaringly obvious to us
Mhm.
needs to be done. We need to uh, be aggressively patient on convincing them that it's time and have fun doing it. I mean, if something doesn't work, try something else. This is a game we have to win.
I truly admire your determination. Also coming from the business sector, you understand the mindset of people who work in business
Right.
and aligning something simple and you got to buy stuff. Why don't you just add this way of deciding who you're going to buy stuff from? So
Yeah.
it's a very simple concept, which I see some government agencies, and I think it's a much easier way to implement for corporates and government and local councils to do. So I admire you for this, and also admire you for all of the incredible work that you've been doing. You have been really a champion in this quietly, and I don't see you making lots of selfies and cutting ribbons and stuff. You just kind of get on with it. And I appreciate that very, very much. And I'm really grateful that you took the time to share this. The replay will be ready, I think, in about, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. And then I'll send everybody who signed up to for this, and then we'll distribute it through our network, the replay of this. But it's been a pleasure and an honor listening to you. And if there's anything that TBLI can do to help you, don't hesitate to ask. And it's a very simple, idiot-proof idea that can be implemented, and you're not having to create a whole new mechanism there. And you are, because the experience you had at the ranking that you had at IBM in how many points you would get, that's really quite simple and brilliant.
It's 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 the way it works with RFPs. And unless you've been on one side or the other of a request for a proposal, you don't understand the power of the number of points associated with a specification. Really, really important. I did things I never thought I would need to do in response to some of those things. I remember I had a request for a proposal from the Alberta government because I was stationed in Edmonton. I was selling to the Alberta government. And one of the questions was, please tell us the extent to which you are contributing to the economy of Alberta. I thought, what? I mean, you're looking for a computer system here. Why are you asking me about the way in which IBM is contributing to the economy of Alberta? But they asked it, and there were 13 points associated with it, so it deserved an answer. So I put together an answer, which I would never have put together if they had not asked. And it turned out we were doing really well on that particular question, fortunately, and we won the business. But it was a reminder to me of you pay attention to things that are important to your customer. And I think we need to tap into that market force more. And thank you for the kind words, Robert. You're providing a platform for these issues that is really, really helpful. And more credit to you for doing that. Thank you.
Well, it keeps me off the streets. Irritates my wife. Says to every day, when is it finally gonna break through and happen? But it gives me energy. It doesn't cost me energy. And as long as you're doing things that gives you energy, then you're doing the right job. So Bob, thank you so much.
Exactly.
And I'll send you the link. If you want me to distribute anything other than your website or reports or anything, just email it to me and I'll send it out.
Yeah, just point people to my website. It's
Okay.
pretty well organized with all of the tools. There are about a dozen free open source tools that may be helpful to them. So yeah, feel free to do that. And I'll
Okay.
also post the recording on my website for other people as well when it's available.
Super.
So thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, Bob. Stay well, stay safe, stay sane. Remember, it's farming, not hunting.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye bye.